purple on it. Blue.
We're recording now, so they can hear us. He has provided me with these handy tips on how to do this. I have done it before. I'm supposedly realized.
My wife came over with me last night. It's nice for what they were, because the day before, on Sunday, I would never leave it, Sunday, no, Saturday.
Okay, it's 1:30. We have a public hearing code amendment, Okanogan County Code 17A.400.130 water availability study. And For anybody that didn't know the procedure, there's a sign-up sheet over there. If you wish to testify, please get on the sign-up sheet. And I'll open it up to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Perry Huston, Director of Planning and Community Development for Okanogan County. As you've indicated, what you have before you today is a proposed amendment to Okanogan County Code 17A 400 or 130. Now, the actual code section, 17A 400, was adopted into the zone code in August of last year. That provided the authority by which you could then designate water availability study areas, and we'll get into the purpose of all that here in a moment. Based upon input, for the most part, from senior water right holders in 3 of the basins in WRIA, Water Resource Inventory Area 49, you consider designating the Upper Tunk, Lower Tunk, and Tamarack Spring as a water availability study. On August 28, you adopted ordinance 2813, which imposed those interim controls on those basins, and then the proposal went through our public review process. So you had a public hearing in September to consider the interim controls. The Planning Commission subsequently conducted a public hearing. Their recommendation was to adopt. They offered no amendments. It is now in front of you. So the action today, depending upon, of course, the decision that you make, is to place, if you will, to designate Upper Tunk, Lower Tunk, and Tamarack Spring as amendments to 17A 400 130. So it comes out of the category, if you will, of interim control, now becomes an amendment to Okanogan County Code. So that is a bit of an, back to 17A 400, you establish adoption criteria. And in a nutshell, the adoption criteria is if you believe, based on information provided to you, that you either know or don't know that there is not sufficient water to support additional density or intensity of uses, you can designate that as a water availability study area. Next slide, please.
This is B boundaries.
Oh, okay, very good. I'll read it here, don't know what you're showing me.
I
Well,
clicked when you weren't looking.
I put them in the wrong order, it's my mistake. The boundaries are, in the ordinance itself, the boundaries will be the National Watershed Boundary Data Set, and we've established the December 16, 2015 published date as the boundaries we'll choose. So when we go on and look at the map, the boundaries of Upper Tunk, Lower Tunk, Tamarack Spring coincide with this mapping system. So, the ordinance adopting any water availability study area will describe the scope of work for the study, including checkpoints for monitoring the progress of the study. Now, in your draft ordinance, you'll note that in the second portion, there's a draft at outlining what the scope of the study would be. Obviously, subject to your discussion and amendment, should you believe that needs to be augmented in some way, assuming you move ahead with the amendment. Now, the action of designating it as a water availability study is I am directed to not accept any application for the subdivision of property, with these exceptions. Public purpose segregation where no potable water supply is required. Divisions made by testamentary provision to the laws of descent. Now, this is land left to people through the act of a will. Divisions made for purposes of separating land on which a residential structures currently exist to allow the recording of covenants, conditions, or restrictions, or a conservation easement which prevents the construction of new residences on the parcel created through the land division process. So you can pull off your existing house, barn, shop, all of that, break off the rest of the agricultural land, providing that you intend to put a CC&R on it or someone is putting a conservation easement. 4, divisions made where potable water supplies will be provided by a water right approved for such purposes by the Department of Ecology or by purchase of credit from an approved water bank. So if you have a water right, if you can obtain water from a water bank, then you can still apply to subdivide your property. Now keep in mind, this division made where potable water supplies will be provided by an approved water purveyor or municipal system. Now this language is already adopted into the code. So that is not the amendment before you today, although obviously all related subject matter. And I know we received some comments that spoke more to this section of the code than the actual amendment to 130. Now, building permits, you still apply for. So, and the application is not proposed to use permit exempt wells defined in 9044-050 as a source of potable water, or the use of a permit exempt well is defined RCW source of potable water has been approved in accordance with the applicable in-stream flow rule as current or hereinafter amended and or gross substitute Senate Bill 1691. Now, of course, the first section, if you're not using a permit exempt well, if you have water right, if you're in a water system, if you're trucking water, I mean, there's a variety of different shapes, exception one could take, you can get your building permit. Number two, right now, in accordance with the SSB 1691, we are allowed to impair in-stream flow through the period of time that an update to the Watershed Plan is created, and that of course is due and is in progress to do February of 2021. In-stream flow, at this point at least, wasn't what drove the question of the water availability study area. It was impairment to senior water rights, or the potential impairment to senior water rights. ESSB 1691 does not authorize you to impair senior water rights with new water usage. Strictly in-stream flow is what you're allowed to impair. So the discussion of water right holders is still active and alive, if you will. You also created in your code a 2-year window for this review to take place. You cannot extend it unless you find that substantial progress has been made in accomplishing the adopted scope of work, and the extension is necessary to accomplish work that has been identified as necessary to complete the study, and the necessary resources to complete the work have been budgeted, or the source of the necessary resources has been identified, and application date utilize the resources. Now this, driven in large part by the viewpoint of the commissioners, but certainly by other input that was received. Water availability study areas were for a very specific purpose, and that was to gain additional information to help you or I, as an extension of you, to make decisions regarding land division processes. So you put these bright lines, if you will, around this study area. Now, we've talked about what is already in the code. What is in front of you today is an amendment to 17A 400-130, which is where you list the water availability study area. There are none listed at this point in code other than the interim controls you adopted back in August. And that identifies Upper Tunk, Lower Tunk, Tamarack, Spring. We've already started some level of analysis in those basins. So very core, but to give you a snapshot of what's going on up there, parcels that are developed. Now, we haven't done the site-by-site, we haven't completed the site-by-site search yet. So anything that shows an improvement value flagged as a developed parcel. That might be a barn, might be a residential structure, anything above a value of 0 is included in this number. So we don't know exactly how many residential structures are currently pulling water from permit exempt wells in the water availability study area. We will know that through the course of the analysis. Undeveloped parcels, this is where it shows no value for improvements. We have not broken out the state and federal land or the public land. We have not done the analysis in terms of how many of those parcels are undevelopable for whatever reason, conservation easements, CCNRs, topography. So again, these are coarse numbers, but it gives you an idea of the potential for future development in the water availability study area. Now, we have started to review the water right holders in the water availability study area. These are the course numbers. We have to go, yes, I'm sorry.
I apologize. Can you go back to that last slide for just 1 second? I'd like to ask you just a question to clarify something.
Yes.
These are current parcels this is not parcels that could be created.
No.
This is existing
Parcels on the ground according to the assessor's overlay. Right. You have a mix of 20 acre, and then we'll see that in a later slide. You have a mix currently of 20 acre and 5 acre zoning, which lends itself at least to the suggestion that additional parcels could be created. all other things being equal. What is part of the reason the code is crafted in the manner that it is, it's that potential for additional parcels. That's as much the point of concern as providing water for the existing parcels. Now, providing water for 686 parcels is one question. Providing water for 686 parcels times 2 or times 3, etc., is of course yet another concern. So that's part of the analysis, which we will do. We will actually generate a complete buildable plans analysis in accordance with the guidelines that the Department of Commerce has issued. So in the end, we will have a good idea of the parcels that exist, how many are developable, the parcels that could be created under underlying zoning, and of that, how many are potentially developable. So based on that, now we're still working on the question of what constitutes consumptive use for a residential parcel. Obviously, at that point, we do the math. The number of parcels or the number of potential parcels by the consumptive use equals however many gallons per day, per year, how many acre feet. We'll do that analysis. And then that will give us a pretty clear idea of the water demands that are potential for the water availability study there. And side note, we're doing that work essentially throughout the county as part of our comprehensive plan review, but we've certainly targeted this as a result of the actions the commissioners have yet so far to date have taken. Next. So again, the water right holders, now we need to go through this, be a little more exhaustive. We'll go through and figure out how many are active water rights, how many are water claims, how many are inactive, and with now the information, Commissioner Holver, that you actually gave us on the list of adjudications, we'll try to tie back how many of those water certificates in the database, essentially as they were recorded, have now been affected by any adjudication. Next one. So this is your water availability study area outline. You have the blue line and the 3 sections identified. We went through, and now the well counts are as they are reported in the Department of Ecology website. We have started the reconciliation process. Lower Tunk, for instance, there's 20 well logs on file. We'll try to tie those back to a developed parcel, or whatever other purpose the well's being put to, some are irrigation, different purposes. So we're looking for 2 things. One, a well that we can't tie to any parcel, or a parcel that shows development activity, but we can't tie a well to it. So we'll be looking to see if that's residential activity and try to identify what the water source might be.
What about stock watering?
Well, that'll be part of our well analysis. Merely because it's a well doesn't mean it serves a single family residence. Maybe a well that pumps water according to a water right, or it could be for other purposes. So again, Lower Tunk, 20 logs on file, Tamarack Springs 7, Upper Tunk 137. So now this one, what we've done is show, and I apologize, it's really tough to see the legend, but you do have on your table, and I should have mentioned that, I'm sorry, on your table is the draft ordinance you're looking at today, copy of the presentation we're giving you, and a larger version of the maps that we're showing you. So, I believe the robin egg blue color, if I'm sure right. No, the yellow is rural 20 zoning. The kind of beige color is rural 5. You have the, and correct me if I'm wrong, the beige color show parcels that have development value, the C2 is not, is that right? I can't read this if you're under.
Actually, the light pink is developed.
Light pink's developed, all right.
A little,
And then the dark
that's
pink is.
the darker pink is developed. So, see that?
That pink's
Barely
developed.
see it.
Well,
Very good.
And then this under here is minimum requirement district.
Now, the requirement district, remember, only exists within the boundaries of the reservation. They call it open for the tribe. The red parcels located on the right-hand side of the map are, there's a few others scattered about, other parcels that currently exist. All the rest of the parcels are in excess of 5 acres. You can see the mix of zoning, so that'll be part of the analysis that we conduct.
And the darker lines is common ownership.
Okay,
So
very
that-
good. Then we also, at this point, information which will lend itself to our, buildable lands analysis. Those parcels blocked in by the course lines are in a common ownership. Obviously, if it's under common ownership, there's at least a heightened possibility that some kind of development proposal could be made as opposed to parcels scattered about. Not to say the other ones can't develop necessarily, but it's a different sort of a proposal. And of course, if it's a 20-acre parcel in a 20-acre zone, there's limited opportunity for development in terms of the creation of additional lots. You do have some possibility of a more intense water use, depending on what you might be contemplating. So, next parcel, or is that the next slide, that it?
This one is just a little bit more clear on the developed versus undeveloped.
Okay. So, in essence, commissioners, that's what we're looking at. I mean, in a nutshell, it's your impression at this point, obviously you'll hear public testimony today, that we need to do some additional work up here before additional lots are created. But that's what we're here to talk about this afternoon, to determine whether or not you wish to leave this in the code or take another action. Questions of me? Well, then, if you're prepared to hear public testimony, that'd be your next.
Okay, I'll close that and we'll open it up to public testimony. Any, could you check and see if there's more?
There aren't any new ones.
Pardon me?
There aren't any new ones.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Nancy, you want me just to add you
Yes.
to this list?
Yes, please.
Do you wish to testify?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that wish to testify. There's 2 that signed in that said no. So normally what we do in public testimony is if we have like more than 10 proponents that want to testify, we will time the testimony. So there are only 5 today. We will allow you to testify beyond the 3-minute period, but if you get redundant or go into a sermon, why, you might get this. Just saying. Okay, so Gerald Green, Tonasket, you are the first one to testify. Dennis, you're on deck.
I don't only got 3 minutes to tell my story, is that right?
No, you can or beyond the 3-minute limit. If we have more than 10 people to testify, then we usually limit it to 3 minutes.
All right.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I want to talk
Gerald,
to you.
could you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, I'm Gerald Green. I live in Tonasket, and I've had vested interest in Tunk Valley for 83 years. I read the public notice, and it doesn't talk enough about wildfires, in my opinion. Wildfires have a lot to do with the water supply we have or don't have. I want to take you to J. Green Road, and let's go up to the Tamarack Springs. And on the way, I want to convince you that there's more water available since the fires than there's ever been. And it has to do with fire. Tamarack Springs is private owned, where that's developed. And up to the west side of Beehive, there's government, Forest Service owned timber that's where that water comes from. I don't know how many acres it entails, but that property is destroyed. And, it's never been lost, and it probably never will be, but anyway, that's where the headwaters of Tamarack Springs is. If the Tamarack Springs seems to be, the intention of whatever it should be, but anyway, I own, property on Armitage Road, and, I really wanted to develop it. But if it goes where I hope it'll go, I can't do that. So, I'm gonna get on to a little more important things. I think that, the wildfires should be named along with the basins. You know, you've got the upper basin, that's a Crawfish Lake wildfire. And it's privately owned, and it's owned by the Forest Service. They were able to, get something out of it, you know, they logged it and, before it all blew, but there's between Tamarack Springs, Tunk Valley, or, Upper Tunk, which is Crawfish, and Meter Mountain, west of you could kick west of the Tamarack Springs. That's privately owned, with the state having probably the only old growth forest in that area. And I think that would be considered Lower Tunk. But it's in the same shape as the rest of it, it's fried. So in trying to convince you that there's more water now than there's ever before, I got, with the help of a good friend, I went to the internet. And here's a study of a healthy conifer. I got a study of what dead trees grow out of the ground. Anyway, we'll go with the healthy ones. Conifer forests can reduce the annual volume of water recharging the ground aquifer by 70% or more compared to ground. I was a little shocked that I heard this thing. Timber drank a lot of water, but I didn't realize it would be 70% of the total. That leaves 30% for a thirsty old man or a cow or whatever. But that don't seem like much, but that is 30% that goes on down the creek. For the rest of it, broadleaf woodland is much less than conifers. Some species and some certain soils and geologies can actually increase the annual volume of groundwater. And I went to other people and I wanted to know what that meant. That means that grasses and pine trees draw less water by far than a fir or a tamarack. And I'm guessing that with private land and the government land on the springs there, it's about 50-50 of each. It is possible to control the impact of forests on water supplies by varying species. I think that's what that means. Some species take less than others. Okay, I had quite a time finding out how dead trees, how much does dead trees draw out of the ground. And here's what I got out of it, going to the internet. A tree consumes water in two ways. The most important is through evaporation. When water evaporates from the leaves and a solid pillar of water is pulled upwards through the branches, stems, and roots. But in the spring, there's also a lot of root pressure that sucks water from the ground through osmosis. Inside the tree, the salt concentration is higher than the outside. This is caused by water to travel through the cells in the tree. If the crown stem harvested ends with moist or wet stump, but it will only continue for a week or few weeks, and the stump is drained and will slowly die. So that tells me that leaves a huge surplus of water that it could have been a green one instead of the dead one. It took 70%. So that's my story. I still think that because of the burns, got all three of them. We've got more water to be charged with than there ever was before. That's my story, and I'll let somebody else talk.
Thank you, John.
You bet.
Dennis, you're next. And Chris, you're on deck.
My name's Dennis Brothers, and I lived up in Tunk Valley now for most of my life. Anyway, there were springs above my property on National Forest, and some of them on my own that came out of the mountain on the 5,000 foot elevation. My house was at 4,300 feet. I was the highest house in Tunk, right on the south side. Had several hundred acres in there, and if you're familiar with that area, there's springs all around the top of that mountain. Water comes out year round at about 5,000 feet. In the 25 years that I was aware of those situations with the water up there, I applied to the state in the middle 80s for riparian water rights to build a trout pond, fire protection, irrigated with small orchards and such, and went through the process with the State Department of Ecology, which was in the end very frustrating because they let me go through 2 years, and at the end of 2 years, they denied my use of these waters for a pond and irrigating 3 acres, and they did give me surface water rights out of the spring for domestic water use. I think it was 1 acre foot. But anyway, my point being is that they denied it. When I called them on it, they said, well, we're not giving out any more riparian water rights. That's just the way it is. But they still let me go through the 2-year process. So dealing with the government and bureaucracy that was accompanying some of this stuff, it was really frustrating for me to be let along that I was gonna maybe get some water rights. And then at the end, they told me, no, we don't give those away anymore. And then I see in the paper in this public notice that your senior water rights that you're worried about is part of this study. My problem is that from what I know up there, all of the people that had irrigation rights are no longer irrigating for one reason or another. If you don't use it, you lose it after 3 years is my comment that I hear. You know, I don't have irrigated property up there, but there's nobody that's irrigating anymore. If the Glenskys aren't taken out of the creek anymore, there's nobody even using that senior water rights irrigation that I know of that are viable rights anymore. So that's the other part of this study is that, and Mr. Green here wants to develop a couple pieces of property, and during the review process of 2 years, it occurs to me that you can't do anything for 2 years. Well, he wants to go down the road with this piece of property, drill a couple wells. What's the county gonna do for his value on his land? And you're taking away the right to drill a well on a piece of land that you paid top dollar for? Is the assessor's office gonna roll back all the taxes that make the land just worth pasture up there during this time frame? Because you can't utilize it, and maybe I wanna break off a piece of my property for my kids to have a well on and live on. we paid money for these properties, and this to me is a devaluation of our property values big time. And I don't feel like, and I remember, Jim, I heard the story, the county hired a hydrologist to do a well search years ago here for the building and spent all this money, and basically, he was wrong on what his recommendations were, and that was a hydrologist. So who's gonna conduct this study while we sit and wait 2 years? And is this just the start of more runaround and the freedoms that I had? And I'm afraid this is the start of not so much you control the water, you control the people. And over in this Seattle area, where a lot of the Hearst decision and a lot of the rhetoric has come from, those people, all their water for Seattle comes out of the Green River, Cedar watersheds, and they transport all the water away from the local area where the water is, down to the cities and utilize it. Up here in Tunk Creek, when you use it for your land and for irrigating your garden and septic, to me, it leaches back into the land. I'm not transporting it out of Tunk Valley. I'm utilizing it, and it's gonna leach back in, I feel, to the aquifer. So even if you're using that water, I'm just using greenery that you're creating stuff as a benefit for wildlife. And there, acceptance to all this stuff, but in general, I just feel like, I think the study maybe could be done, but I don't think you should take away the rights of people in the meantime to be able to do wells on their lands unless whoever the powers that be are willing to compensate the people for values to start off with. So there's several concerns here, obviously, but I don't think the water thing and how those springs in the top of Tunk Mountain get their water, they don't come from the top of Tunk Lookout. The lookout's only a few hundred feet above where the springs are. You're trying to tell me water runs out of there all year? Well, I don't think the water in that valley comes from that basin. It comes from a long ways away, and I think that studies have been tough to prove because of that, because they don't know water moves through the ground. And how it moves and where it moves, I think the professionals would be well drillers that have been drilling here for 50 years might be able to comment on that stuff maybe more because they've had to deal with it. And then every year it changes according to what kind of runoff we have and that stuff. So anyway, there's a lot to be concerned about, but I think that taking a review period for 2 years is really not fair to people unless you're gonna give them tax breaks. And the government interfering in our private land and what we do on it, I agree that, maybe there's salmon issues and water issues, but up in Tunk Creek, there's nobody even irrigating that I've seen for years now, taking, the time to get away from them. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Chris? And is this Tyson Carlson?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chris Arnoldson Brewster. Just wanted to confirm that you guys got my comment. I think I sent it in last week or something. Other than that, I was asked to submit a comment. My attorney, it's not mine, so all I was going to do is provide that to the board.
Okay, very well. Yeah. Thank you. The clerk will pass it out. Just
Okay.
Everyone should do what she needs to do, scan it on the record.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to Tyson and Nancy. You'll be the last to testify.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For those that don't know me, my name is Tyson Carlson. I'm a geologist with SEPA Consulting. I'm here to talk a little bit about the proposed ordinance. Specifically, I just wanted to focus a little bit on some of the special provisions under 17A 400 120D. I understand that during this interim 2 years that projects will not be allowed to progress unless they have approved water right from the Washington State Department of Ecology or mitigation credits from an approved water bank. I think that I understand what you're trying to do with that. I think it's overly restrictive a little bit in that there are other mitigation opportunities that can be employed outside of those two things, and would ask the commissioners to include some additional language in that section to include something like, or an approved mitigation plan that will address consumptive use impacts in the basin. There are other ways we can mitigate, and we're effectively doing that throughout the state, specifically in Kittitas County, which is kind of the poster child for these type of water availability issues across the state. We have have several projects that are happening under mitigation programs that are not captured under the umbrella of existing water right or a straight mitigation credit from the water bank. So, happy to entertain any questions about that or talk about more specifics as needed. Then I guess my other, in building on the gentleman before me, some of his comments, is that I did contact Washington State Department of Ecology and talk to a water master in the area. And he indicated that although there were some complaints, there were no valid claims of impairment, that they had a lot more information that I'm not aware of with the availability issues. But according to the state ecology, that there hasn't been any valid claims of impairment noted, which kind of builds upon some of the previous gentleman's comments. The third one, as a hydrogeologist by nature, I would also caution that in addition to looking at the number of parcels and the wells and location and density, the hydrogeology is quite complex up there, I think, as the gentleman also spoke to. And that withdrawal from a well within the basin doesn't automatically mean that that same quantity or the consumptive use, it's not the total quantity, but the consumptive use quantity would be debited from the stream. There are stratifications in the ground, as I'm sure you are all aware. And that a withdrawal from a deeper aquifer can manifest itself on a stream much further down or even outside the basin. So I think it's important to look at these factors as well. Specifically, I can name examples in Kittitas, Yakima, Benton counties, that when they are setting up their county water banks and mitigation programs, that they look at these certain locations in the basin where these wells occur and then have to project where the impacts occur. And sometimes they're many, many miles away, just dependent on the hydrogeology of the area. In other words, that the use may occur up here, but the impacts can occur much further down in the basin or along the extent of an island. So I think those are important considerations when thinking about this water availability. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nancy?
Nancy, the outlier, sorry. Nancy Soriano, Tunk Valley. And I submitted comments by email, I don't know if you got to see those yesterday. And so I thought I would supplement those comments with some visuals, because the pictures worth 1,000 words. So the first image I have here is of the graph I got from the Water 49 report from 2009. And I just have to say that the comp plan that's being challenged and the updated comp plan, when I've seen of it, I don't see the Water 49 Watershed Plan, that information incorporated in any of the zoning or land use plan. I did pull this first page of graph out of that WRIA report. And it shows, it's a graph of precipitation in the OMAC area over 100 years, between 1904 and 2002. And I look at this and I think, we need to identify a new normal, because for most of that 100 years, the precipitation has been below normal. And you can see it kind of gets back up into the normal range in 1980. And I can remember in Tunk Valley, the community, there was a rumor that there was going to be a moratorium on these empty wells, because it was obvious that it was very dry. So, to talk about, I know this is not about a moratorium, but I'm just saying there's been a long history of concern about water, groundwater depletion and aquifer depletion in the Tunk Valley. The next two pictures I took 2 days ago. these show our snowpack. There isn't change. This is, the first one is the north half, the second one is taken from the south half. And, you know, to quote from the watershed report, the watershed report says significant trends in wet or dry periods have been observed over the past 100 years. And the effects of these trends on water availability need to be considered in watershed planning. This hasn't. I think this would be a wonderful step in that direction, towards having more specificity in land use planning, identifying where there's water scarcity. So, also from the Water 49 report, it's the recharge to the aquifer is somewhere between 1.5% and 5% precipitation. And when you don't have any snowpack, you know, it's probably less than that. And also from another report on water rights in Tunk Valley, they identified, and also from the USGS report, that the aquifer is shallow, which means just like a little backup, not a big backup, so not as much water there. You know, in addition to the fact you don't get much precipitation and evapotranspiration 95%, and then only 1.5 to 5% actually gets into the groundwater. I think there are lots of indications that there is water scarcity, and I disagree with the comments about no verified water rights, no impacted water rights. I have pictures here, numbers 4 and 5, of the Koblinski land, 60 acres that used to be irrigated in alfalfa, and it's just, they abandoned this after generations, like 3 generations. They abandoned this water right that was from 1900. And because there wasn't enough water in the stream anymore. I mean, maybe DOE hasn't come up and verified this, but, you know, they abandoned it because there was no water, right? I've communicated with the water master also, with Mark Shrukin, so they have not determined if there's no impairment, they're just not looking, they don't want to look. So, as I've said before, water right in the current market is like worth $400,000. I know if you just bought one. No one walks away from a water right to irrigate 60 acres of alfalfa after doing that for 3 generations, unless they have to abandon it. And I've also mentioned the Dave and Zoe, the Tunk Valley Water Association group that had rights to irrigate 40 acres of alfalfa. They did it, you know, Virgil Green did that for a long time. They bought Virgil Green's land, they paid high price for that land. And then in the same time period that we're talking about, when the Koblinskis lost their water, there was no longer any more water, enough water to irrigate 40 acres. This is just a couple miles down the road from Koblinskis. So they went through the DOE and they converted their water right from surface water from the creek to groundwater. They went to the DOE. They spent a lot of money digging wells, putting in pumps. The DOE knows about it because they had to do the conversion. So for anyone to claim that the DOE doesn't know about any impaired water rights is confusing. So they converted to a groundwater, and they still can't irrigate because there wasn't enough groundwater to irrigate land that had been irrigated for a long time. So I do think there's evidence of impairment to water rights in Tunk Valley. So I hope you look at these pictures. I think they speak volumes. The Koblinskis had to go 20 miles down the road and buy new land and new water rights. And nobody does that if they don't have to. It's inconvenient. They had alfalfa next to their cattle before, now they have to go up and down. I mean, they wouldn't do this if they wouldn't walk away from water. So, I think that Mark Shuby from the DOE needs to actually come out to the valley and look at this, which I've asked him to do, and he hasn't. So, let's see. I believe that wildfire and water scarcity are related, and right now the county is zoned for the valley is zoned the same as a minimum requirement district. We have 1 acre densities in the Tunk Valley. That was adopted in 2016. The year after this massive wildfire in Tunk Valley is an inferno. So right now, and this zoning was passed a year after the 2015 fire that included Tunk, which was the largest fire in the history of Washington State, which allows, it has 5 and 20 acre parcels zoning, and each 5 acre parcel is allowed 5 multi-family residences, motels, resorts, or single residence per acre. It's, and then the 20 acre parcels are, you're allowed 20 residences, multi-family residences, hotels or motels, 20 per 20 acre parcel. So to claim that we have 5 and 20 acres is misleading. But I would argue, based on the fact that we have impairment and we have little recharge because of low precipitation, which has been a trend for 100 years, that you should adopt this overlay, and you know, I don't know the protocol, I'm not a hydrologist, but it seems like if you can determine based on, there's a lot of information about climate and precipitation and evapotranspiration and not to mention impairment to senior water rights, you should be able to do some kind of quantitative evaluation of the aquifer. Is it being recharged? And if we're already, I mean, 1,300% over incorporated in Tunk Valley, a lot of, that's kind of misleading, but the fact that we do have impact to senior water rights indicates that the aquifer is probably being depleted more quickly than it's being replenished. And I think that's happening even without another well being drilled. These impairments coincided with the additional, timing around 1990 when people started to dig wells in the headwaters. I don't think it's a coincidence. And I think we'll continue to have a depletion of aquifer even without any more wells. So, you know, I just applaud you for working on the overlay and start, you know, I think we have more parcels now than water already. I think this is a good start to at least prevent additional withdrawals. And I think people don't understand that they don't have a right to the water on their property. You know, when you buy land, if you don't, that doesn't, water not included. And the county's not doing anything to people. They're just trying to provide public safety, not zone where there's a wildfire risk, and protect senior water rights. You know, it's like there just isn't any water up there for a limited growth. And certainly not for, you know, densities. The other thing, oh, I was going to say one thing. Okay, well, thank you very much for your comment and bravo on the overlay. I think you got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody out here that has not testified that wishes to testify? Okay, Mr. Huston.
Commissioners, again, for the record, I'm Perry Huston, Director of Planning. Any questions of me?
The mitigation piece brings up a really valid point. If we wanted to look at, because we only have basically two mitigation strategies in there. I know like Chelan County right now, I've been up in the Tunk Valley and if everything's burned and the water's running off real quick, you're not getting any storage potential. I think Chelan County's quantifying artificial beaver dams, for storage. So I think there's more opportunity for, people to, if they want to develop, to pay for mitigation that could help, everybody.
Mr. Houston, did I get ahead of myself? Should I have closed the testimony?
I thought you did, I'm sorry.
I did too, I apologize.
Well, yeah.
So I will close public testimony over to staff.
Well, again, I'm Perry Huston, Director of Planning. There's a question of me, water mitigation.
So to add pieces of mitigation in here, what would we need to do for that?
Well, it's not the subject matter before you today per se. However, certainly it's within the purview of the commissioners to, you have a number of options. You can direct the construction of language, to go out as a proposed amendment to 17A400. It would be 17A400, 120 probably where it would land.
Oh, that's right, because this is just adding.
Say the matter before you today is 130, but it's related subjects. Right? We did not create a provision in the code, perhaps we should, but we did create a provision in the code where each water availability study area could be kind of tailored in terms of exceptions. Argue with it all, create equal, and maybe something else we want to look at. If in the adoption, water availability study area should be the future ones, that you can actually craft essentially the exceptions, be able to be appropriate there. So, another option that in terms of process, you can certainly at some subsequent date adopt interim controls if we wish to do that, and go through that process. So we need to eventually remand to the planning commission and then back to you, much as the process by which the Lower Tunk, Upper Tunk, and Tamarack Springs were identified as water availability study areas. Those are options. You don't have it in front of you today to adopt it. Perhaps taking liberties with your question, if so, I'll quiet down here. But when this was crafted, essentially it tried to embrace recognized mitigation strategies. Now, since that time, obviously, and we tried to capture your alternate water systems, essentially anything that doesn't use a permitted well. We really didn't get into other sorts of mitigations. When we talk about alternate water systems, what immediately comes to mind is you have some sort of on-site storage and truck water in, and that's your water supply. You're not using a permitted well. We really didn't talk about, for instance, an infiltration gallery.
Infiltration galleries.
Where you get truck water put ground.
Collecting runoff and then dissipating it slowly.
We didn't really look at that. If that's something the commissioners wish to look at, certainly there's a process for that.
Well, I think that, question, we're starting in the WRIA 49 watershed work, and that's intended to identify potential for water banking, all the things, or several of the things that were brought up in the hearing. There's a few things in the hearing that were brought up that the study, and by the way, the study doesn't have to be 2 years, correct?
No, that's correct.
So, and just to make sure it's understood, it's not restricting the use of wells, it's restricting the additional subdivision until certain questions are answered.
All existing parcels can still drill wells.
Right. Under the rules that are now established.
All existing parcels can still drill wells. You just can't, under this, if this goes through, we just can't subdivide to make more parcels.
Well, your existing parcel, in terms of the building permit, your existing parcels can obtain water based upon the language in 1781. You know, an option, commissioners, as I've worked my way through this, I direct your attention to the ordinance itself. Under the second, ordained, purpose of the water availability study or designation to determine if current use for exempt wells has impaired the ability of senior water right holders to obtain the surface water to which they are legally entitled. The projected use permit exempt wells will likely impair the ability of senior water right holders to obtain the surface water to which they are legally entitled. And 3, if the current projected use permit exempt wells contributed to an inability to meet state flow appropriation identified in 73549. That is the section where we put lines around the study. You certainly do have some opportunity for amendment there. So again, I'm not taking liberties with your observation, Commissioner. If as part of the study you want to also explore other mitigation, you could certainly amend this ordinance to include those directions.
One thing that, that I'm not sure about the wording is to obtain the surface water to which they are legally entitled.
Well, good observation, you might well have a senior water right holder
That has
groundwater.
groundwater, right, and they may have converted it to groundwater to keep more water in the stream.
Commissioners may wish to entertain an amendment to strike surface, just leave it generic to whatever water the water right allows them to obtain.
So our options today are to adopt this ordinance as written, to adopt an amended ordinance, or to direct staff to create a amended ordinance and bring it back. What day are we on in the interim controls?
Oh, you have 6 weeks, 2 months left before you come up against the 6-month time period. Of course, the 6-month time period will only require a public hearing to continue it if that's what you chose to do. But you have ample time to work on this ordinance.
Yeah, I wouldn't venture to adopt anything to change it today. That's what's being proposed. The other thing is there's some testimony that I think requires a little bit of backup research.
I'll just make a couple comments before we get started. This study is mandated by the state of Washington. They don't have a choice. Luckily, it is also funded because unfunded mandates come to the county all the time, and it really puts a strain on how much money and what and where we do. But if we do nothing, it'll happen just like the Shorelands mine, Shorelands in 1972. The commissioners at that time, and might I add that the commissioners at that time were frustrated with the DOE, as every board that I have known since the inception of that has been frustrated with the DOE, including this one with 6091 Hearst Lock and all the other stuff that they throw at us all the time. So if we didn't do anything, it would be imputed. We wouldn't have a choice. Here you go, this is your deal. That's why we're in this study process. And I appreciate Aspect coming up and giving us a little bit of different insight that I hadn't considered. The other thing is, Dennis, you mentioned we had a little bit of experience with hydrologists. I was in on that from the ground floor, and I was very, very skeptical because I talked to old-time welders around here. They all said, water is where you find it, not where you want it to be. so that's the reason that we put, when we did the geothermal HVAC in the courthouse, we put bottom line contract, not to exceed this many dollars. And they chose to hire that hydrologist to the tune of about $185,000, and they ate that, the county didn't. Because they came back to us and wanted to negotiate after the fact. We said, absolutely not, you guys are the ones that made the mistake, we advised against it in the beginning. So, just so everybody knows, that's how it went, but you're right, the hydrologists were wrong. So, the other thing is, impairment usually has to be proven, and unfortunately, most of the time, it's by litigation. So, even though we've had testimony on impairment, not only just today, but on several, we're not the people that judge whether or not there's impairment. That being said, I would agree with the rest of the board that I think there's room for improvement. I think we've got some different ideas to work on in this ordinance, and I would be in agreement that we should continue and even further deliberation.
So,
Just add a little bit, because this is gonna happen during this process. Confusing because this, and not necessarily just the ordinance, but the overlay itself, was started, at least the drafting of it, prior to the HERS fix, 1691. So things were changing pretty quickly. And this overlay started because of some uncertainties. And then what you're speaking to, Jim, actually, that it isn't mandated, this particular piece isn't mandated. It's actually the process that we're about to go through that actually should assist us, maybe, in determining what will happen with the Tunk Basin and other basins as far as mitigation is concerned. And so the Watershed Planning Unit will be witness to and a participant in identifying some of those issues. But that is the part, the planning part, that we have to do by law. And this happened to come into play prior. And so here we are, kind of in the same context, but applying it only to one basin. The watershed planning effort that was done before actually looked at every one of these basins to some degree, but there weren't any rules that were a result of it. And that's why where we are today with the so-called HERS fix. So there's questions to be answered either way. And this study actually will probably, might dovetail right into the effort that we're just embarking on under watershed planning. So, but it may end up being a little bit confusing as we consider both at the same time. I just wanted to state that. Some of the things that came up here even will probably find themselves in the watershed planning unit's work. So, I'm going to at least consider changes, but I want to just keep that in mind that this still leads to that watershed planning 1691 work. And it may be very helpful to, in fact, look at some options in the meantime, but during that process, we'll be looking at those options. Water banking. Right now, we don't really have a water banking situation to draw from. We may very well, but you know, some of those changes, we might make those changes in this, and we don't have to take 2 years. So that's something we should consider as well.
I appreciate Commissioner French's clarification because he's exactly right. And that's part of the frustration that we deal with. We were starting to address this one problem and we start down that road and a lawsuit, litigation, or the DOE changes the goalpost for us. So we have to back up and do like the ordinance says, do they rescind one, try and put another one up, and who knows what the DOE is going to do tomorrow. I mean, in the last 4 weeks, they told us, oh no, you guys are in control of permit exempt well applications in Okanogan County, and then the next guy after the ladder says, no, we are. DOE, and then they come back, no, you know, I mean, that's the frustration of trying to work with these types of people.
I think one of the problems I have is that, like, if somebody's gonna purchase water from a water bank, they're gonna spend money for mitigation anyway. But you may actually create a localized problem. I know that, you know, hydrology and everything, you know, you can go upriver and you can say, yeah, we think that if you take water here, it might have eventually got there from upriver. But I think that if we look at these different mitigation strategies, you might actually be able to do more benefit from a local standpoint of cooling, you know, just from the looks of it, from the forest fire devastation and everything else, you got a lot of runoff, I believe, coming off in the spring that's coming off just really quick. So instead of allowing all that water to come off, if you're storing a little bit of it, trying to cool down, you know, we're always talking about warmer water temperatures and things like that, but all flowing water cools things down. So I just think that we really need to look into the mitigation efforts a little bit more, because I think we might be able to do more good in that area.
I'll talk to you.
Okay.
I've already closed public testimony, so
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I'll talk to you.
I had a question about it.
Okay.
Do we have, so, the direction for staff, I guess,
I have another question,
Yeah,
as far as the intent of the ordinance.
I have a number of specific questions when
Okay.
we're at that appropriate time.
Okay.
Now's an appropriate time, I'll go ahead and ask my question. Listening to the discussion of the commissioners. The surface water reference, we'll tidy that up. With your direction, we're talking the ordinance now, the second ordaining where it outlines in fairly general strokes the parameters of the study. Sounds like there may be some opportunity to incorporate some additional work for the study, other mitigation measures, this sort of thing. I'm also thinking that this dovetails with your observations, Commissioner Branch. Part of the work that we are directed to do throughout all of WRIA 49, and we would have done it here, although it isn't necessarily specifically spelled out in the ordinance, perhaps it should be, is to come up with essentially our 20-year water budget. How much water do we believe we will utilize based upon potential lives, that sort of thing, which would lend itself to a more refined discussion of potential mitigation. Obviously, we're talking about mitigating 20 acre feet, it's a different scenario than 1 acre foot or 2,000 feet. So some quantification of that would probably be appropriate. Again, we'd have probably done it anyway, but I can certainly incorporate that language into the ordinance, so we have a more specific direction contained therein. Yeah, you made reference to some of the testimony, perhaps needs additional research. I may be wrong, but I assume we already started that work. We're sorting through the water rights on record to see which ones are active, which ones are not, which ones are claims, those sorts of things, which would certainly speak to the assertion that many have been abandoned or not. But either way, it's just a little more information in terms of what the water budget in this water availability study area would be.
the other thing I would look for is sold water rights, and I don't know how that record looks in
Or
there.
transfer back to different industries, so use it a little bit.
Yeah, he talked about that, but selling the sale of water rights, I don't know exactly how that looks in the DOE's database, so trying to figure out if any of those rights were ever sold or.
There should be a record of review attached to the water right, which would then inform whatever transfer took place. So we should be able to track that.
So, the question I have, and actually maybe it's a comment or even more of a, let's do it this way kind of a thing, but, the water availability study is in essence underway.
It is.
And so, some of the issues that were brought up, in fact, suggest that so, when I look at this, I say the water availability study is valid in terms of adopting it and conducting it. It's not a moratorium for 2 years. That was a limitation we put on ourselves. And so if we say, okay, well, we don't wanna adopt this water availability study area today, we're gonna study it to decide whether or not we wanna adopt the water availability study area.
No, I disagree with you. What it does, the wording here is a limitation to somebody. Let's say that I really want to develop my property and I know that I can mitigate for the water that I'm going to use. Now, let's say I come up with a very good mitigation strategy, but it does not fall into the two categories we have listed as the only two specific categories. Then where do we go? Because if we read it as law, or read it as it reads,
Okay.
it says that we can't do that. And that's what let's say I said, okay, yeah, let's say I said, okay, I think that I can come up with a strategy to store water, for my own future use. Here is my proposal. Can I develop my property? And Mr. Houston goes, well, no, because it doesn't say approved water bank or.
That's correct. So here's what I'm saying though, is that we adopt a study area, we conduct study work, and we say, we studied it this much, we lift that limitation by our own action to accommodate what we found in terms of the opportunity to do water mitigation. So in other words, that thing is not cast in stone for 2 years. So if I say, yeah, let's go ahead and adopt the study of the area, we find somebody makes a proposal, like you say, and in the meantime, we're looking into that. They're actually doing the work. And then they say, this is what we find. We're saying, well, that actually is part of conducting the water availability study. And we say, we amend it. We lift the restriction that subdivision can be. I don't see any difference in that than going through some kind of a land use action that allows it.
I do.
Where's the difference?
Well, the difference is that if, in this case, the county is gonna look into the study, the county is gonna pay for the study, the county's gonna do, because in the other case, if I'm a landowner and I truly wanna do this, and I believe that there's a mitigation strategy that works, and obviously it has to work,
Yep.
then I can pay to have that work done
Yep.
on a localized level.
Right.
You know, I think what you're talking about though is on the other hand, using that study that somebody else paid for to inform us to lift the whole thing.
Actually, it informs us, just like we're being informed in this hearing, that there's information there that we have to verify. The same as if somebody comes up with some proposal, and I guess it's how you look at it, but I see the opportunity, again, and I'm emphasizing the fact that this is not a 2-year study.
I totally understand that. Yeah, I'm not saying it is a 2-year study.
And so what the study's for is to determine what we should or shouldn't be doing. In the end, we had testimony that actually talked about zoning rather than just the water availability. But the water availability and the zoning actually have a connection, because I could have a lot out there and say, I'm not gonna allow any more lots, there's existing lots already, and there's an uncertainty in terms of how much uses that use that one lot would use. Because you have to get the information, you have to put the information on the table. So, but I guess the reality is that if you that and you don't believe that's an option, and it doesn't look like an option to you, it's all what it appears to be and what it is. So if you're not prepared to adopt it that way, because
I'm not, because I look right back to the 173-548 Mark Closed Basins, and it basically says, if I want to spend the money on a hydrogeologist to tell DOE that the water is not hydraulically connected to the stream, I can do that. And if I give them enough proof, then they possibly could give me a well.
The
I don't
the
know,
good
I'm not gonna
news
say
is
they're-
that we're not DOT operating under rules established.
I totally understand that, but
Yeah.
the other
But
thing
it
is
does say
that
48 does say that.
But that's rule DOE, and
we're also not here for, I mean, eternity, so.
I will be here for 2 years, but
Well,
we're not gonna go.
we'll be here for another 2 years, but after that, you never know.
Okay,
So,
well-
it's good to get it all, but the thing is, get it all done correctly the first
I
time.
move we continue the hearing.
To,
Actually,
If the commission wishes to go ahead and put your motion on the floor, it's fine. I do have some observations that might inform the discussion.
We get a
I
motion
did.
in a second, I'll allow that under discussion.
I did not second
Okay.
the motion.
we had said the,
In terms of the nuts and bolts, bear in mind you have a study session the 14th, you do not on the 21st. Then you're in your regular schedule up to mid-February for President's Day, I guess it is. In terms of your process, again, by reminder, and forgive me if I'm redundant, but the ordinance in front of you, we can certainly offer additional direction, and that's to the actual parameters of the study, that sort of thing. In terms of this particular section, which has drawn some attention, the commissioners always have the option. If at some point sufficient information informs a decision, or you just feel like you ought to do it because you want to open the door, that kind of discussion, you can always adopt amendment to this code section, either through the route of directing it to the planning commission and going through that process, or you can adopt it as interim controls, or get here to 1736-795, go through the public hearing process and then remand to the planning commission. So, the point I make is keeping in mind that, and I agree with the gist of the discussion, obviously, this ordinance needs to be very specific, or as specific as it can be, in terms of what you wish to accomplish with the water available state.
Right.
Your other legislative options remain open.
yes,
So at the point you believe a different course, or opening the door to other options, or for that matter, restricting other options. And for the sake of the folks who don't do this all the time, this water availability study can inform decisions in other bodies and regulations. You mentioned the zone code. If at some point through the course of the study, as an example, you determine that some of the densities just aren't reflective of what seems to be the available water supply, you can amend the zone map on an interim basis and then send that through. It isn't all necessarily tied directly to the comp plan process, which obviously is a duration. There may be subdivision regulations. There's a variety of tools that you can utilize to implement whatever your water availability study revealed. So I just wanted, and you probably already know all of this, but I thought for the sake of the record,
actually,
I'd
for the
say-
sake of informing the public that are here, I appreciate it.
so just by way of observations, commissioners have tools that you can utilize at whatever point you're comfortable doing that.
And I guess that's my point in more words than I used to describe what we have options to do.
well, I know for sure the surface water portion of that is not correct.
Have that.
So. I would say that we.
By way of,
Or you want to second the motion?
He hadn't finished the motion, so now the motion died on the floor.
Okay.
being a little protective of myself and my crew, I'm not sure that we can get all of the research that I'm thinking we ought to do by the 14th.
Okay.
Perhaps we could shoot to the 28th. I think we can come back with some definitive information, some solid proposals for you to consider.
And we're still inside of our six.
Still within your 6-month period.
That being included.
You have a preferred date?
The 28th, during my study session at 1:30 would be handy. Clerk of the board, do we have anything you're aware of by way of conflict?
Just a second. 20.
I think I'm good.
Okay, gotta be in
move to extend the hearing,
Continue.
or continue the hearing to the, 28th this month.
Time specific.
1:30?
Second. Second.
Okay, motion second, discussion.
Question from staff, if I may, do you
Sure.
wish to leave the record open?
I think we should.
By, email and written.
That's your
Email-
direct.
Email and written comment only, and, but no, take no public, normal public testimony at the next continuation.
Understood.
Okay, also in discussion, this, no matter what we do, we'll have to go, by our celebrity for legal review.
We actually reviewed the ordinance in its current form. I'll certainly send any of the amendments I'm suggesting, or will suggest to the commission to him as well.
Okay.
So the vast bulk of that review has been accomplished.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign, motion carries. And I'll close this portion.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome. Thank you. Before you continue, Gerald, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Where does this put, people that want to go ahead and, we just kick the can down the road? Is that?
Well, we found some flaws in where we were headed
Okay,
as a result of public testimony today.
yeah,
And, we're gonna try and correct that, and then we've had some other input that might be able to mitigate circumstances for your future development.
so maybe I could, do.
But to,
Down the road, I might be able to
to
do
Andy's
that.
point, I don't know what your water availability is, but
Well, I don't either.
yeah, you can still drill a well, you just at this point can't subdivide further than you are.
Yeah. Okay. I got 42 acres. I want to cut them into 220s, and that's the end of the subdivision. But I need water to do that.
Yeah.
So are those, is it 142 acre block, or is it?
It's 42 and a half acres. I want to take 20 out, one end of the other.
See, those are the types of situations right there, where I'm talking about, like, an infiltration gallery. I mean, if you think of consumptive use, I mean, even if you were to restrict the water to in-house use only, where you're only probably 90 gallons a day consumptive, maybe 100.
No, less than that. Well, under the current, 9061, guidance, is less than 10%. So, typical in-house, Kittitas County right now is approving 275 gallons per day. So less than 10% of that would be 27 gallons.
27 gallons, but when you talk about.
The only observation I would make is that you've actually passed the motion, continuing the public hearing, and have taken your action for the day. If you want to get deeply into this discussion, I might suggest you put a motion to reconsider.
Yeah, that's okay, I think we've gone far enough.
Just an observation, it's up to the commissioners how you wish to proceed.
Yeah, I'm good. Change subject.
Well, I had closed.
You adopted the motion, correctly?
Right, and then I closed
And then we close the public hearing.
this portion of the public hearing for the continuance. Hopefully we have to see it.
In essence, your hearing is
Is over.
over.
Yes.
You haven't adopted an additional discussion, even though, playing the field by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
just to
confused
be
with that.
clear on that too, though, is that this isn't a quasi judicial discussion at all, so you are,
Yeah.
Another discussion entirely. If y'all go out and park in all one at a
Yeah.
time, that's a different issue altogether.
Your story.
So they can certainly contact their commissioners as they choose to. No, good observation.
Because any decisions in that regard would follow whatever process that it was required to make each of these.
Okay.
Did you get your copy of what Chris had? Yeah, that's it. No, that isn't mine. Just wanted to make sure you got a copy because I've got it. Yeah, that's it.
proceed, Mr. Chairman, or?
Yes.
Did you want to wait? for Commissioner Holden?
Oh, yeah, he just wanted to
Yeah.
use the.
I wanna, condolences to you. That is not easy.
Because I think I bought it from, Dwayne Wilson. Yeah, I bought it from Dwayne was the first one. but-
It was a blessing.
Yeah, I'll bet it's not easy.
She was really good right up until the day she had a stroke, and 2 days later, she was gone, and then that interim, you,
Okay, I'll continue. We haven't seen you for a while.
Still might, still clear. Something like that. But I can only go one well.
You need to talk to the.
yeah, we did have, yeah. Doctor.
How are you been?
I've been well, how are you?
How's Dad doing?
He's doing real well.
I haven't seen him in a long time. What's he doing?
Put his folder in for
The heck, yeah.
I know, yes. I know, it was
But we
interesting.
sent him back to school.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We went from the Redskins to Okanogan County to.
Yeah, to the state, and then,
Yeah.
and back to,
Yeah,
back
the
to
ag
school.
department too.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for what you do. Thank you.
Just continuing with your agenda, I just wanted to update you, the Cannabis Operations amendments, by way of quick history, you had your public hearing remanded back to the planning commission. They working with the advisory committee, came up with proposed amendments. Those have gone out for public review. We're approaching the end of the SEPA review period. So those, so far, we've actually had very few comments. That'll be on schedule then to go to the planning commission on the 28th of January, and depending upon their action, of course, subsequently back to you, so.
Do you have a copy of your agenda?
Which one?
Here's agenda. I'm restarting my computer.
Oh,
Perhaps the clerk of the board has an extra one, if you could.
Okay.
So anyway, by way of update, that will be coming back to you. Their public hearing, the end of January, sometimes they take an additional meeting date, so it should be coming back to you.
Establishments on our radar. 50 of those applied and have been licensed. I think there was 2 that we were unable to license due to zoning or lack of legal status. The health department has now stepped up and sent like 28 establishments around here that have been operating without permits, and we're working together to get them permitted. So I have 4 new applications. I'm just waiting on the health permits to be able to issue their license.
So I've noticed some emails going back and forth, and I believe in our health, our meeting tomorrow, we're gonna have some public testimony from, overnight rental down in Terrace. Is this?
That particular email string, if I recall correctly, they're actually in the city. So in that particular case.
Oh, they're only relegated, or only
They're
regulated.
only concerned with public
With
health
public health.
regulations.
Okay.
So
Okay,
that,
perfect.
a little bit outside of.
is in Patera?
In the Terrace, yeah.
Oh, cause there's like, there's that rebuilding and apartment complexes burning out. Where's he?
No, this overnight rental
Okay.
in the Terrace, but I was curious why the county wasn't getting emails, and now that answers the question.
Yeah, so we double checked when the clerk of the board sent us that, so we'd be informed of that discussion, we double checked, they are in the city limits. So that's purely a public health, if you will, issue, keeping in mind, of course, that your public health regulation reaches in to the incorporated areas too, as well as the unincorporated parts of the county. When last I talked with you, the bulk of the non-respondents were in Brandon Beach. So we still need to get a better pipeline into the Grand Beach Homeowners Association, because I suspect part of the problem is there's some confusion, because the homeowners association does the booking, and pays taxes and everything else. They also think they're taking care of the licenses, and that is just simply not the case. So we'll follow up on that and see if we can get a little higher level of response. We're still talking with a couple of the reservation companies, mostly in Manal, and they've actually done a pretty good job of checking with us as people apply. They have to manage their property, so far from perfect system, but we're actually, I think, getting much better compliance rate that we've had in the past. Rocky's done a pretty good job of tracking those things down and working with folks. Sometimes they're simply confused. They think they're okay. They have permits from public health and business license numbers and all sorts of other things. We're just missing now the new county licensing requirements. So, all in all, I think we're making pretty good progress. So we'll continue to work on it. Questions, observations?
So I had a gentleman that was applying, and I said, tell me what your experience is when you do that. And I'll start with the very best first, and that was everybody who talked to me on the phone was very polite, very helpful. So that was a good thing. I think just getting used to what we're implementing here will be helpful in making sure that it's kind of packaged, so that we're able to impart the information to those that are wanting to apply, and then them knowing what they need to do. He sent me the list of things that he found out in his research, and really not complaining much, but the only thing he did, his comment was that if there was something that was more packaged, so that when he got the information, he'd know exactly what to expect as he goes through the process. But in understanding it's due, that's why I asked him. So that's the kind of feedback that we're going to get.
We're in the Manal, it's permitted pretty much in all the other zones, but we're still, legitimate or no, is not my point. The expression, though, is some confusion. They don't get the connection between getting their permit from everybody else and whether the underlying zoning even allows you to do it. There's some assumption that if you get all your permit,
Right.
you're okay. Well, of course, many zones in the Med House, it's not okay. So when we do get pushback or some challenges, it's, as Rocky points out accurately so, it's because they're either not in a zone where they can operate, or they're not legal pre-existing, or both. So they simply can't do it, and unfortunately, some of them, true or no, I have no reason to disbelieve them, some of them actually purchase the property and calculate a certain level of income from using it as a nightly rental in their investment plan, be their mortgage prepayment or whatever. Not necessarily something we can or should do anything about. Land use zoning doesn't necessarily ensure profitability of investment. But I think, and I keep trying to think of some way to get that word out a little better. The management firms that work locally, they get that, and they're pretty good about explaining these things to people. I don't even know where Airbnb is in terms of trying to get some, exactly.
It's up there somewhere.
Trying to get somebody to
cloud.
actually talk to.
Yeah.
So.
Can I interrupt you for just a second, because I have something that needs to be asked.
Yeah.
So, do you familiar with what's happening in Tonasket with the police department?
Just been following a little bit, don't know anything about it.
Okay.
What I read in the paper is,
So the sheriff, being newly elected, asked me to help him discuss some issues if they want to possibly contract with the county. And so at 3:30, admin asked if I would go talk to them a little bit. I'm just wondering if you two are okay with that, or if you want to do it.
Well, I know a little bit about it, so, I mean, if it's, it just seems to me, if it's the question about the procedure in terms of, how the sheriff decides whether or not they want to contract with the community? I mean,
It's basically, it's trying to figure out level of service
Right.
that a customer wants.
Right.
And the monetary, the monetary amount that the county would have to come up with, and how that would look in order to have that service exist.
I suggest he's a part of the discussion first off.
I can certainly do that. I mean, if I'm kind of hearing the underlying question, certainly any kind of contract of that nature puts other stress, if you will, on the level of service that they're otherwise delivering. So even if you're compensated for that, there may be other equipment needs or other things that you need to consider under budgeting authority. And, you know, whether you contract with them or not, or the sheriff's in the discussion, but certainly.
No, this is not, the sheriff asked me because I
Understood, but the point I make is any budget impacts are obviously solidly within the purview of that business. If that's the executive session I saw listed.
It was, but it doesn't, we didn't feel it falls under an executive
Fair
session
enough.
because it's
Also,
not.
what you're saying is we won't have an executive.
Yeah, we will not have an executive session because there is nothing that, there is no. Well, Tanya and I discussed it, and we thought, oh, maybe we should go into an executive session, but then in reading through everything, there is no reason for it. There's no legal premise for it.
I can't envision what twist that discussion might take that would match the requirements for an executive session.
So, you know, one thing, because knowing what's going on and knowing that that's part of the discussion, one issue that comes to mind, and I think we ought to talk about it, is that, for instance, contract length is very relative to whether or not.
I couldn't see anything less than, like 7 or 8 years, I mean, a long-term contract.
So, I mean, there's a number of items, somebody's gotta go talk to somebody, I mean, it doesn't make any difference to me. It's just that I know that it's something that we all have to be involved in. And we all have thoughts about when I see something like that. And so, the contract's really a big deal because the unpredictability of various elected officials is part of the consideration.
But I think in all reality, it's just that we're the, fiduciary, portion of it, and so.
Do we sign the contract?
And, I don't know, did the commissioners sign the contract with with Pateras?
It's been a mixed bag, at least in other jurisdictions. Some have argued that the sheriff as an independent elected official can do that. I don't concur, because he's incurring specific long-term liabilities for the county. In my mind, that triggers a requirement that you actually execute the contract. He is a signature.
Yeah.
So some of that uncertainty is some of the stuff that we need to keep in mind.
Right. But this is not me saying, hey, I'm going to go do this. This is me posing the question because the question was asked of me, hey, would you come help in doing this? And I said, I will not until I confer with you two.
Yeah.
To
So
find
that's,
out if you're okay with that.
I'm okay with it, just like I said, but I mean, I really strongly suggest that Perry is part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because of his familiarity with probably contracting, between law enforcement and county, the history of it here.
I serve at the place. I will be here.
I want to make sure it's 3:30 today because she just said 3:30. So I have to be.
Well, I thought a note on the agenda, I was thinking it was today, on your agenda. What
Was that the
executive
executive session at 3:30?
Remember, served, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, then we're already set.
Yeah, I'm already.
Cross that out. So he was already gonna be done by 3:30.
Well, we'll strive value in that direction.
All right.
Questions, anything else on that, Leroy? Okay.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.
A comprehensive plan. Commissioners, I received a request for an extension of the scoping period. As a SEPA responsible official, it is my decision. I have made it. I have extended the scoping period for 2 weeks. to give people holidays, say, over the holiday season and whatnot. It's 2 more weeks, I appreciate that, but I think in the end, it'll probably make a smoother process, because we won't have to debate whether I should have extended it.
When did you make that extension, just so that?
It publishes Wednesday, I extended it to the 18th.
So just within the last couple days?
Yes.
Maybe, okay. I got a few emails asking for the extension, so I just wanted to make sure that was after.
I received a request last week that the scoping period would have ended January 4th. And we published this back in mid-November, so it was the holiday season. I appreciate not everybody lives the stress-free existence I do when it comes to the holidays, so, you know.
Well, one thing too is that, you know, a lot of entities are out there and they wait till the end, and the end happens to be around holidays, so.
And extended it, I published it, will come out Wednesday, I extended it to the 18th.
I'd like to get as many comments as you possibly could on the scoping, so that.
And actually, we're getting a fair list of comments now, you know, and I think about it, I meant to bring over an index of the ones received. Did not do that, I apologize. I'll send that to you just so you can see who's commenting and how many we're getting. And we're getting some pretty good comments. Some are a rehashing part of what we received back in the first process, but there's still legitimate issues in terms of the EIS, so. Let's see. Oh yeah, index of comments, and I put on my agenda that I was going to give you that, so I'll go ahead and get that over to you, just for your information. Questions, comments? WRIA 49 had our meeting last Thursday. We're putting together a subcommittee to talk about the operating procedures. We did find the actual written document, Commissioner, of the operating procedures for the Watershed Planning Unit. There's been some other examples submitted.
What year were they?
Pardon?
What year were they?
You know, I don't recall now off the top of my head.
Okay.
But we'll send those out. We had a couple of other examples. So there's a subcommittee being formed to work on that subject. They'll come back and make recommendations to the planning unit. Their meetings are now scheduled throughout the year for the first Thursday of the month, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Kind of running concurrent with that is their recommendation for the submittals. You received 3 to the RFQ for the facilitator. So obviously they should come to some meeting of minds and how they're going to make decisions before they make that decision. So they're kind of running on parallel course. Hopefully we'll see some, and I think we will. I think we had a pretty productive discussion.
I thought it was great.
Last week, but things are kind of beginning to get some momentum up. We got the list, planning unit members, for the most part, stabilized. We're still dealing with a couple of, if you will, ancillary issues. The other irrigation district, we talked about that last week. We're working on that. We're getting the alternates and members straightened around. I do want to mention, though, some of the letters that you signed.
I think he's just listening.
Are you just listening?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Some folks are interested.
I know, that's okay. Appreciate that.
Some of the letters were mistakenly generated that you signed, and those were specifically the ones by, there's a misunderstanding in instruction, the advisory group names put forward by the CCT, we're not appointing those, so I pulled all of those letters.
Well, same with Sarah Walker and Melody Krems,
No, the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery is still seated member. We didn't pull those off from the advisory group status. That, we can, but that was not our discussion prior. And that was because you, as a commissioner, I believe the chairman, at any rate, participating with that group as the local committee. It's up to the board, but they are at this point.
It may be helpful to look at the current list and where everybody is.
Oh, very good. I'll go ahead and send that. We actually have a cleaned up list.
I looked at it and
It's going out to the members anyway, I'll go ahead and send it to you.
I thought we had moved the Upper Columbus Salmon Recovery Board too.
No, you moved Kelp, moved Home Builders, you moved,
I'm 100% positive that we moved the Upper
Well,
Columbus Salmon Recovery Board to a non-voting.
I always reserve the right to be wrong, so I suggest that's impossible.
Because I remember with Angie was showing us.
Somebody brought the issue up to you? I mean, as far as.
No, I just don't
curious.
feel, honestly, that, I mean, yes, I am the chairman, but I don't feel honestly that the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board really should be a voting member in a watershed planning.
They don't, I mean, it's up to you.
I don't have a problem with it at all, but you know me. It's like, I guess you have, some people keep the score sheet.
I'm not keeping a score sheet, I mean, this was way back when I was like, hey, maybe they should just be on the technical advisory committee. And
That could well be, like I said, I always reserve the right to be wrong.
But nobody's balked at it or.
I didn't know what to say anything, with that said,
Well, that's the reason I brought up the score sheet thing, because I was looking at it and I was thinking, some people are that way. And so I look at it and I go, so the score sheet people, I wanna look and see what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm not that way, it was in the very, very beginning when we were talking about an advisory committee. And I was just thinking about the fact that, well, I don't know, I mean, I guess in retrospect, Okanogan County is a member of the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board.
Which is my memory of the discussion.
That may have been, and you know what, Perry, I apologize, maybe that is how the discussion wound up, was that we just decided that because Okanogan County was an actual member of the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board, that we had direct.
Well, Hubbard keeps it that we ever do. I mean, Turkey Board does as well, but you remember we had up on the board as we were moving things around, we just double check to see what we may have done.
Well, and chess pieces get moved very quickly.
I've asked Rocky to send me the list of names. I was going to incorporate those into the minutes where I have a highlight. So should I ask her which letters were the ones that were signed on the 4th that weren't pulled?
Oh, she should have, had she not communicated to you? I'll make sure she does that, yes.
So
Because your minutes will need.
you'll need to
will need
reflect
change.
the letters that were actually sent, not necessarily everything that was signed, because some of those were not correctly signed.
No, I'll make sure she communicates that to you. I'll double check that for you. We have the list polished out, so we're getting ready to send that out. I'll copy the Commissioner of Michigan Government, will make sure that Laney gets one as well. So that,
I reserve the right to be wrong too.
well, you're Commissioner, you're never wrong.
No, well,
No.
Occasionally the attachment to accuracy is
Unless-
closer than other
did
times.
you hear that? Unless Commissioner Branch is talking to me, then I'm
Well,
wrong.
it might be a fun mistake.
And reserve the right to.
That's good.
There are exceptions, obviously.
Yeah.
So we'll get that list to you. Vanessa and I talked, and I think I reported out in part Monday, and the application they're happy with now. We're going to finish putting that in the legal system. That triggers in the generation of the contract, the actual agreement.
Is that for both? Excuse me, is that for both, Perry?
No, the grant, or excuse me, the well tracking grant, we haven't got to go ahead yet.
Okay.
But I'm guessing you guys are working on
Yeah,
the right
all of us.
so I mean, I get that. But I will jog that along a little bit. I explained to her the commissioner's reluctance to enter into a contract, start funding the facilitator until we had a little more certainty. I mean, she made 2 points, and we know this. She reassured me that the intent is to reach her back to January of 2018 in terms of capturing expenses. And she said she can communicate to the review team at DOE that we fast track this a little bit, entered into the system in terms of generating this funding. So That seems to be well in hand at this point. Anything else on RIA 49? Then airport safety zone, I almost made it for this Wednesday, couldn't quite, still doing the math analysis in terms of filling out the environmental checklist. So it should make, in terms of our notification, the comment period, a week from after tomorrow. Been in communication with Mr. Danson, so.
Is that what we called it, safety zone?
What it actually, that's what the code actually said, airport safety zone.
Yes.
So, and that's the quick recap, I guess, those, the way it works, you have in your code 300 and 301, I believe it is. One just adopts essentially the FAA standards for height restrictions and things like that.
Right.
And, you know, in retrospect, I almost wish we'd used a little different nomenclature, because the FAA zones parallel the language for what now we're doing with the safety zone. That, we can make it work, but there may be something we need to pick up down the road. So what you will be looking at eventually, let's go through the planning commission, are some additional regulation in those safety zones, 4 as I recall correctly. So what you'll see, and this is where we might want to take a look at, see how we can adjust it. What you'll have now is your underlying zoning as your base regulation. You have the FAA standards, which obviously we don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, they have to do with airspace.
We codified it so that people have a local reference. Then now you'll have the safety zones on that. So I'm putting in cross-tie language that essentially the most restrictive will prevail in the event of any land use proposal. We can make it work, but it is, now that we're actually getting into the nuts and bolts, perhaps a little more cumbersome than it could have been, but I still think we can make it on. So it is
FAA safety zones are height,
for the most part, some very broad language about reflecting surfaces, bird attractants and whatnot.
they've been in place for many years.
But that, assuming I'm on schedule now to get that published, the planning commission will see it at their meeting in February. You'll see it sometime subsequent to that. The RIA 48 closed tributaries, a lot of time, so we'll just blow through this quickly. What is, you do need to know is, Cow Creek and Gold Creek did the reviews, and we're waiting for feedback from the Yakima Nation, before they sent them to us. At any rate, they're satisfied with their work, so, I will be getting those in short order. So we'll have 2 more, base tributaries now with the 91 maps. We're still kind of on our way through this, but it appears the comfort level of the Department of Ecology has increased a bit more on those areas that haven't been reviewed yet. Keep bearing in mind our discussion of some month or so back now was they're going to stand by their new work for the ones that have been revised. The restricted areas, they're not making decisions at this point because of what they believe is a lack of science. Those areas, those basins that are not yet been reviewed, decisions either, because they haven't yet been reviewed. That's relaxed a bit, so if you have a relatively clear-cut example close to the main stem, downstream of the closed tributary, whatever, they are helping us make some decisions. So the doors open a little bit wider in those areas that have not been reviewed. So, just by way of update on that. Champerty Shores, the Barker project has completed their section of the sewer extension. That's from Veranda Beach up to his project site. I chatted with him last week. We're going to pick this up next week. But in terms of our next steps, to get the LID put together and actually begin to work on the extension then from Champerty Shores down to his. I'll go ahead and put it together and then I'll review so we can talk about how we wish to proceed with that.
Is that something, Is that infrastructure that we want to try to put in like right away, or is that?
Well,
Piece from
Champerty
down to that Parker project, or are we waiting for more development potential to occur? Or
No,
potentially, I guess.
the proposal has been to actually do it. There's actually, the bulk of the parcels that will be directly impacted by the extension are in Champerty. Shores, of course, that was their deal with the city, which county supported. You get the water, you get the sewer. There's some opportunity with parcels intervening between Barker's and Champerty Shores. Of course, at some future point that we should develop, and I think we do need to, and this part of the PS&E, the actual construction design, figure out how to best facilitate those parcels participating in this so that they actually have some value, or we don't include them in the LID. And that's what we're looking for, Commissioner. The timing on this thing, you have a relatively finite construction window, when you don't have horrendous dewatering requirements. Now, that said, Barker's construction project is complicated, he's gravity, established grade and all of that. The other pressure lines, you don't have quite that requirement for precision. But anyway.
Dave, I apologize, we didn't contact you, but the executive session has been canceled.
Okay.
So I got a hold of it, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. However, I think there might be a meeting tomorrow at 1, not an executive session, but I think only one commissioner is gonna go.
3:30.
You might still want to dig to hang for this thing.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, 3:30 right now upstairs. You want to, you got time? Okay,
Sure.
Because you just came for.
Oh, yeah.
Executive
Yeah,
session.
yeah, that'd be fine.
You don't need him for the executive.
Until-
Well, I'd be very
Yeah,
happy.
maybe you could do consultation with them.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Now I've got some research I can share.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
So anyway, we'll pick Champerty Shores up next week. We're gonna talk to Josh's session tomorrow about the WTV proposal that's out and the mitigations that we talked about for the District 3 proposal you've already adopted. The wolf tracking system, somebody tried to actually put an incident and the link failed, so we double checked that. Remember, Commissioner, we put together the wolf incident tracking system 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Somebody actually tried, this last incident, where, tried to enter it, wondered why nobody responded, just because the link was down. So, we've now fixed that. So, that's your agenda. Anything else, Commissioner?
I'll see that we got all the participants.
Yes, for your reading enjoyment, here is your activity report, which will show the end of the year tabulation. Upstairs, so I heard the commissioner say.
Yeah.
So all the commissioners are going to attend? No, just fair enough.